Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here. And first of all, just a shout out to all the veterans on Veterans Day, and thank all the men and women for their service and sacrifice, and that includes the families of those men and women. Now, it is my pleasure to present my favorite topic to my favorite audience, the power of presence for women who lead. I do a lot of speaking and writing on the topic of leadership presence, but doing this program just for women is truly my favorite thing to do. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you, audience, for joining me. Like all of you, my life I have pivoted so much I feel like a ballerina. You know, I've been circling. Just a year ago, I was doing what I thought I would be doing for the rest of my career, and that is traveling internationally and working face-to-face, eye-to-eye with the wonderful people in my audiences. So last year I was in Kuwait doing a program for Kuwait Oil. I was in Paris at the Ritz, ladies, the Ritz. The only time I've been asked to speak there, but hey, I'll take it. I was doing programs in Edinburgh, and when I redid my very best-selling program for LinkedIn Learning, I had a hair person, a makeup person, a cameraman, a director, someone who worked on the scripts with me. I mean, it was a whole new world for me now. That was my world then. And I also was writing a book called Stand Out. Stand Out came out 1 month ago, and it is a culmination of all the things I'm going to talk to you about. And there is one chapter specifically for women, but there's also all that generic information about leadership presence that we'll touch on as we go through this as well. So the first thing I learned about leadership presence was by the people that I was asked to coach, because I was asked to coach intelligent, competent, technically savvy people, women, men, who had leadership titles or had leadership potential. And what I was told was there was something missing. So it isn't a reflection of all those qualities. I think those qualities are things you have to even be considered as someone who needs to develop leadership presence, but leadership presence is not that. Instead, leadership presence is what people say about you after you leave the room. It's all about the impression you make, regardless of your title, of your intelligence, of your technical savvy. And the things that I heard about the women I was asked to coach were things like, it isn't that she couldn't do the job, it's that no one else sees her that way. Or it's not that she doesn't have the credentials, but I don't think she has the gravitas for senior leadership. Or one of, I think, the most disheartening comments was from the head of human resources, who told me, you know, Carol, the saddest thing that I ever hear is when I bring a female up for consideration for promotion and no one in the room knows who she is. So the impression that you make is what leadership presence is all about. And that's what we're going to talk about for the next half hour. And then I hope you have some really good questions for me, because that's my favorite part, of course. I blog for Forbes, and one of the wonderful women that I interviewed, Susie Monford, said about impression management and leadership presence. She said, you need to show up each day the way you want to be perceived, which is simple to say, but difficult to do unless you do your homework and really know yourself. So if we were in a face-to-face 3-hour full day kind of seminar training, we would do a lot of work in identifying values and connecting in with those things that really help you know yourself. Of course, Dolly Parton put it another way. She said, find out who you are and do it on purpose. And Dolly Parton is one of my favorite women to quote, because she also said, I don't care that people think I'm a dumb blonde, because I know I'm not dumb, and I know I'm not a blonde. At the heart, at the foundation of leadership presence is authenticity. It's not about faking it till you make it. It's not about pretending you have qualities you don't have. It's about helping people express those qualities that you do have, that authentic best self. In other words, the goal of coaching or talking to people about leadership presence is to help align the people's impression of you with your best authentic self. The question I get asked the most about doing this program is, well, if you do programs for men and women, why did you design a program specifically for women? And my answer always is, because we're worth it. And my first advice to women is to really recognize that and bring your femininity to work. You know, there was a day when to be a leader, women felt they had to be more masculine, or at least communicate in masculine ways. Today, that is totally not the case. Women are incredibly valuable to their organizations. We have more bachelor's degrees and more master's degrees now than males do. We bring a great deal of insight and intuition. And do you know that all of this movement to go into more collaborative organizations, that kind of leadership is being called the feminization of leadership, because those qualities that actually encourage collaboration are things that women bring to the table. So don't think you have to be anything like a man. And don't think that if we're talking about things like projecting more confidence, that's masculine. That's not. You can be incredibly feminine and incredibly confident, authentic, and assertive. Of course, there are other reasons why there's a special program for women, and a couple of them are we really face different challenges than men do. We're evaluated differently. You know, they've done all those studies over and over and over again that say if you write a resume of this hard-charging, very successful leader, and you put a male name on it, Howard, that it is evaluated very positively. But if you put that same resume out and you change the name to Heidi, all of a sudden the evaluation goes down. She looks a little self-serving, a little pushy, a little out for herself. It's a very different set of circumstances, and we're evaluated differently. But I think one of the most insidious is implicit bias. And men and women have implicit bias about women as leaders, which is sad to say, but true. Explicit bias would mean that we'd think that women couldn't be leaders because they don't have the capability to be leaders. And very, very, very few, if any, people hold that kind of bias. But implicit bias shows up in very interesting ways. For instance, around the world with male and female, if you ask people to draw a picture of a leader and you just hit that cold, you don't give them any time to really think or prepare, this is what you'll see. You'll see pictures of men. Now, I thought this was particularly interesting because those two drawings were done in a university in Germany. And of course, here's their chancellor, a female. But even when they had a female leader, they still drew a man. When I work with people and in the book, you're going to see that I go heavily on what I call the 5 C's of leadership presence: credibility, confidence, connection, composure, and charisma. And so we'll go through, I'll just briefly talk about them and you can ask me questions as we go through. Credibility, I think this is an interesting one because credibility has a lot to do with what you say, how you say it, and some of the traps that you can fall into, some of the barriers, some of the roadblocks. You can deplete your innate, authentic credibility by using a lot of qualifiers. So and by the way, women use these 4 times more than men. So if you're starting your comments with, this may be a stupid idea, or you've probably already thought about this, or any other qualifier, What you do is lessen the impact and the credibility of whatever follows. Same thing with minimizers. Maybe, kind of, sort of, somewhat, and my own personal trap, which is the word just. I was having lunch in the good old days when people were still having lunch together with a woman who said, you know, I was going down the hallway and my supervisor came up to me and she said, what is your team working on? And I said, oh, we're just, and my boss stopped me right there. And she said, never start a sentence with you're just. That minimizes the impact of what you're doing. Just tell me what you're doing. So I went back and I started looking at my email. And I was shocked at how often I would start a note to someone with just a note from me, or just wanted to catch up, as if it's don't even bother reading it, it's just for me, it hardly matters. And I thought, now that doesn't mean I never use the word just, nor that you should never use the word just. It means that if we use it habitually, and particularly the way I just stated it, just that is going to minimize what comes afterwards, we're not doing ourselves any favor. Tagging is another way that we deplete our credibility. Here's my statement, right? Here's my statement. Don't you agree? This is a good idea, isn't it? When we tag on, it's if we need validation for what we should just be owning and stating. And one of my most requested comments from chief executive officers who asked me to work with an emerging female leader is, please help her get to the point. Women tend to speak, we use more words, we tend to speak around a subject, almost like we're telling a joke. We wait for the real information as the punchline, and we need to practice. Now, there may be some circumstances where that's a great technique, but in most circumstances, we need to practice getting to the punchline first. I call it start with the headline. So if I were in human resources and I was giving a presentation to the executives about who we'd hired for a particular position, it would not be to my benefit to say, well, you know, we've been looking at this position for a long time. There are a lot of qualities that we really couldn't find in everybody. And so when we looked at Bobby had some, and then Sally had some, blah, 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 blah. It would be better for me to say, we hired Sally. Here's why. So if you start with the headline and then you fill in the information, that's the time people are interested. Or start with the headline and stop and see if anybody cares about why you chose Sally. Fillers, of course, are another way, and I've seen really excellent leaders who still put a lot of in their statements, and most of the time, that's because we're uncomfortable with silence. Make a point, put a period on that sentence, and stop. And if you do that, you will greatly reduce the amount of fillers in your conversation. Confidence is the quality that's most connected with leadership presence for a very insidious reason. And that is, we believe that people who are confident are also competent. It's not true. We know a lot of people that act like they're very confident and really don't know much, but we still make that assumption. So since I know you're competent, I want to help you display your confidence so that people see how competent you are. And by see, I mean your body language. This was a shock to me. I did this first set of videos for a little company called lynda.com that I had never heard of, and I thought, well, maybe 12 people will see it. Lynda.com was bought by LinkedIn Learning, which was bought by Microsoft, and all of a sudden I had 2 million views, and I redid this with actors, and we updated it in 2019 when people were still doing things like that. What I know about leadership presence and body language is that the most impactful leaders, the leaders that have the most influence over us, are those who can project both warmth and power. But they also are canny enough to know when to emphasize one of those sets of body language signals. For example, when you want to project confidence, it's in your power signals. And when women undermine their confidence, it's oftentimes by body language traps that we fall into. We tend to overuse warm signals. Now, warm signals are smiles and nods and head tilts and all those things that are so engaging when you're leading a collaborative meeting, or when you're making someone feel comfortable, or you're meeting someone for the first time. But if you look at the woman in this picture, who looks very sweet, very nice, but not particularly confident, she would look more confident if she put her head straight, because anytime you take your body out of symmetry, when you tilt your head, when you take your body out of this plane, you look less confident. And the biggest mistake we make is that we tend to condense our bodies. Now, there's nothing wrong with head tilts and head nods and smiles when they're used appropriately. But when they're overused, when we smile all the time, even when we're saying something that's bothering us, or when we're giving negative information, we're just confusing. So make sure it's okay with you to look serious when you're talking about something serious. And then smile when it's something that's uplifting and positive and warm and engaging. When we condense our bodies, and most women sit this way, we'll bring our elbows close into our body, we'll kind of round our shoulders, we'll slump a little bit, we'll make our chest a little concave, we'll take up as little space as possible. And because power and confidence is displayed in height and space, that works against us. So when we sit up straight so that we look as tall as we possibly can, when we move our arms away from our body, so we're taking up more physical space, we actually look more confident and we're judged as being more competent. And the big problem is not many of us realize the impact of these very small body language signals. Before I show you the next slide, I want you to imagine that you are the photographer for Time magazine, and you are sent in to take a picture of one of the male executives in the company, and you're asking him to pose. Now, think in your mind the kind of poses that most men would find fine, maybe hands on hips or arms crossed in that I've got all the answers kind of pose, or whatever you'd think. Now take a look at what they did with Sheryl Sandberg. There isn't a male on the planet who would have agreed to pose that way, with her hands in what we call the fig leaf position, which is a position of insecurity that people take naturally when they're nervous, and with her legs crossed that takes her body out of that nice symmetrical look she could have gotten with her legs just hip width apart and very grounded. Now again, if you're Sheryl Sandberg, you can get away with this, but I couldn't. And I don't think you could either. So just realize the impact of the way you pose when they take your next picture. Connection is that amazing ability that some people have. Like Maya Angelou said, that you will forget what people did, but you'll never forget how you made them feel. And how you make people feel is crucially important to leadership presence. I have worked with some really hard-charging females, as well as males, who made people feel under her, so destroyed. And only we did what we call the kiss up and slap down method of managing, that I told her, I said, the people that report to you are going to sabotage your efforts for getting into senior management, because they feared her, they didn't like her, they didn't support her. And without that, believe me, it didn't matter what else she had. The interesting thing is that 30 years ago, when I started working with leaders, and I was doing a lot of work on change leadership, if someone had asked me what the number one communication skill was that drove leadership performance, I would have said, as many other people might have said, well, it's probably the ability to articulate a compelling vision of the future and then lay out steps that will help us walk into that future. And I'm not saying that isn't important today, but you know something, when DDI did their global research with 15,000 leaders in 18 countries and 20 industries and 300 organizations, that wasn't what they found. The number one communication skill was, let me go back to that for a second if I can get back. Yeah, the number one communication skill was empathetic listening. That means it isn't what you're saying, it's how you're listening when other people talk. And boy, is that important today when we all need more empathy in our lives. Composure is that wonderful ability to keep your poise under pressure. And that is one of those other things that's so much easier or simpler to say and not at all easy to do. Because here's what happens. We fall victim to an automatic reaction. There is a trigger event. And then without thinking, we go into a response. And wouldn't it be nice if it happened in this nice slow-mo version? But it doesn't. It happens like this, that fast. Now, one woman that I worked with, her trigger was somebody asking her a difficult or challenging question. She was a wonderful communicator until someone challenged her. And then automatically she would go into this reaction, this response that was so counterproductive to her leadership. All of us have triggers that will do that. And our only hope for keeping our calm, keeping our poise under pressure is to find a way to go right down the middle of that process, which means that the second that we're aware that there's a trigger incident or event, we need to say stop. Now, not out loud, probably that wouldn't work too well, but mentally. Stop, take a deep breath, and then choose how you want to react. And sometimes people even give themselves a little pep talk. It might be stop, deep breath, and the word relax, or the words, I've got this, or cool, or whatever would be a trigger word to help remind you to keep your calm under pressure. And if you can work with this technique and get even a little bit better with it, you'd be amazed at what that will help you do and help you become that leader that you really are, help you look like that leader that you really are. And of course, I haven't been flying all year. That's very sad for me because I love traveling and I love the face-to-face interaction. But I do remember the last time I was on an airplane, I heard the same safety announcement, which was to put on your own oxygen mask before helping your favorite child or whomever. And that's great advice for female leaders because we tend to, more than our male counterparts, say yes to too many things. We say yes, we have more responsibility in the home still. And then we say yes to things that don't necessarily align with our career goals. It may be yes to things that would be nice to do, but instead of saying, let me get back to you on that, and taking some time to think it over, we just automatically say yes. We also aren't taking wonderful care of ourselves physically. At least I'm not. Now, I had a dog, my favorite little dog, who died a couple of years ago. And up until then, I was a great walker. I would walk that dog twice a day. We'd go miles. But since I lost Nelson, because now it's for me and not for the dog, I have to force myself to get out and take a walk. That I think is more feminine than male. And I am really working on taking better care of myself in that way, and I hope you do too in whatever way serves you. Charisma is the one people say, well, that can't be a skill set. And in a way, they're right. It's more about a flow of energy between people. You know, charisma in kind of the old-fashioned way of thinking about it was a movie star or a celebrity of some kind coming to a prestigious event and a red carpet and paparazzi flashing pictures and neon lights in the background. And that may be great for celebrities and movie stars, but that's not quite what I'm talking about with leadership presence. Thank goodness, because that's a little hard to set up. What I find is that your authentic charisma is based on something you already do. And being, quote, more charismatic is really relaxing into whatever your strong point is. For instance, you may be very credible. You may have the reputation that precedes you, so people already know that you know what you're going to be talking about or involved with. You may have a lot of natural confidence. And if you do, people are drawn to you because when you look confident, other people can relax. It's like, it's okay. This person is so in charge of herself that I can trust her to help guide us. And that's amazingly charismatic. That is that kind of energy that will just attract people like a magnet, as will your credibility. I worked with a CEO once who was the worst communicator I had ever heard. This person was a male, but he had worked every single job in that organization all the way to the top. And when he spoke, he had such credibility, that terrible communicator that he was, people hung on his every word. He was incredibly charismatic because of that. You might be charismatic because you are empathetic and warm and likable, and you draw people to you because they feel heard, they feel understood, they feel that you've got their back. And wow, I don't know a stronger skill set to have today than empathetic leadership or empathetic charisma. You may be charismatic because you are composed. I have people in my family that are both in the fire department and in the police department, and they all tell me the same thing, that it doesn't matter what your title is. If you're the one in a chaotic situation who is poised, who's keeping control under that kind of pressure, people automatically turn to you as the de facto leader. That's the kind of charisma that composure can attract. But of course, there's one other element. You can have all the 5 C's. You can be charismatic and composed and confident and credible and connected. And if nobody knows who you are, it's not going to matter. Women have a tougher time self-promoting. We just do. I know that I was the worst person at a networking event because I thought networking was, hi, my name is Carol, I'm a speaker, please hire me kind of thing. And I thought, I just can't do that. That I don't even want to talk to people if I have to say those kinds of things. When I found out there are other ways to promote, particularly at a networking event, by the way, great networkers aren't there to say how great they are. They're there to find out what they can do for another person and create that connection. And they can build and self-promote on that connection, but not just, automatically. I had one woman, it was wonderful. She said, you know what I did just to be more visible? She said, under my email signature, I put in a little tiny thumbnail picture of me. She said, people would recognize me and call me by name, and I wouldn't have any idea who they were. But I became very visible. Now, there are lots of ways to do that. We can talk more about that if you have questions. But that is key. Don't be the person that the head of HR puts up for promotion and no one in the room knows who you are. You're special. You deserve to self-promote. You deserve to brag a bit about yourself. But that's probably a whole other conversation. Meanwhile, to end this one, I just wanted to mention that my book, Stand Out, How to Build Your Leadership Presence, has been out for a little over a month, and it's doing really well on Amazon, thanks to all the wonderful people who have bought it, who have written reviews, and then my favorite part, a lot of them have sent me pictures of them or their baby or their dog or their something with the book. And I put those on Facebook, and we've had a wonderful time with that. My very favorite is a woman who went mountain climbing, and she's rappelling. She has the rope in one hand and my book in the other hand. Now, I don't expect many that are going to come up to that, or even would want to come up to that. I certainly wouldn't. But I do thank people for buying the book and then sending me a picture of them on the book and writing a review. And I would very much appreciate it if one of those people were you. But now, as I say, besides thanking you so much, we're going to go into my favorite part, which is Q&A. So if you have any Q's, I'll see if I have any A's.
Great. Thank you, Carol. I will remind everyone, if you have a question, you can use the chat box, or you can also email info@savvyladies.org. And Carol, I wanted to share with you in the chat a comment here that says, I'm volunteering in a board, and I'm not a fan of some personalities. When I was paid to work with tough personalities, in parentheses, woman, I had to make it work. But for this volunteer board, I don't have the bandwidth to deal with the stress. So I wanted to see if you had any comments on that.
Not in general. I would be happy if that person wanted to call me to go over exactly what's happened in some ways. But I think the more we support each other, the more we can break open and have more of those spots. So you can do that in a meeting. You can, after the meeting, you can send an email into the leader, if you're not the leader of the meeting, or into your boss if you did lead the meeting, and say, here's what just happened. I think women underrate how much their bosses don't know. Being on the right teams, and that is knowing what the right teams are, which is why having a mentor or a sponsor is incredibly helpful, particularly for females. Certainly understanding the value of networking, that women have great connections, but we don't utilize those connections as well as men do, because somehow we think that asking someone for a favor or help, that we're so weak that we'll never be able to repay that favor. And that is the wrong attitude. You know, it is a reciprocal world. And there will be a time, whether it's support or whatever, that you can offer that other person, and to minimize what you have to offer in return is not a good thing. When we move to more virtual platforms, and I'm just learning about this because I had a meeting with a company about Microsoft Teams and what that can do for creating visibility. That Microsoft Teams, when I heard about it, I thought it was just another platform that connect. And I don't have anything to do with Microsoft Teams, but I was overwhelmed by what could happen when you built visibility on Teams. What happened to your reputation and how things get connected to you. And so there's a lot of things that are going on in a virtual world that are going to give you new and accelerated opportunities for building visibility. But right now we certainly have LinkedIn, and you ought to be on LinkedIn. Your profile ought to be up to date. You ought to be posting things so that other people, when they search for someone with your skills, see you, see more about you. And I mean, even people in your organization that are searching for people with your skills, because 80% of searches start on LinkedIn. And that's an easy, well, when I say easy, because no one has a lot of extra time, but that's something we all should be doing, and constantly updating and making sure that picture on LinkedIn is professional. I don't mean it's done by a photographer, but I mean, it's not you in your swimsuit out by the pool. All that might be good for other things, but not particularly good for coming across as the talented and competent female that you are.
Okay, thank you, Carol. Those were some great tips. Thank you for sharing those. We have another question for you that says, I always thought that smiling while speaking in front of an audience was a good thing and could be contagious. Can you talk a little bit more and explain why it can really be a trap for female leaders?
Yes, I agree with you. Smiling in front of an audience, particularly when you come on stage. And by the way, in a Zoom or a virtual meeting, have that smile be the first thing people see. Because in virtual events, the heuristic cues, those warm pro-social cues, are the most powerful. It's smiling inappropriately. And here's what I hear from women that I coach. This is what I'm working on the most. When I'm giving a negative performance review, I still smile. It's like, geez, you're not doing a very good job. And boy, you have a lot to improve. And when I said, I'm trying not to do that, but I'm trying not to hurt their feelings. And, you know, instead of not hurting their feelings, what you're doing is confusing them. The same thing I've heard men say about women, boy, this is really bothersome to me. I don't like it. And when they say it with a smile, particularly men around the table go, I have no idea. She doesn't look like it bothers her. What I talk about over smiling is or have a coach. That's why coaches can be very helpful. You need some kind of perspective. You can coach yourself, but be kind. I had one client who was looking at a video of him, and it was for something we were preparing him for a job interview, and he looked at it and he said, hell, I wouldn't hire me. So don't, be kind to yourself. We're all a work in progress. I have not met any perfect people. That doesn't mean that you can't learn from watching and say, oh, that's something that I do a lot. It's just like my use of the word just. And that is, you become aware of it. And then you look at how often that is creeping into your vocabulary or into your communication style. And then little by little, when that happens, you just pull back and go, oh, next time I'm going to do it differently. You don't say, oh my God, I'm terrible, I screwed up again. You just say, next time I'm going to do it differently. And you rehearse that in your mind. This is how I'm going to answer it, so that you have another pattern. Any habit takes some time to change, but some of them are easier. That's why I love body language, for instance. If you've been sitting like this in every meeting and you start sitting like this, how simple is that? And what a message that sends subliminally, because body language is most often not reacted to or even processed exactly the situation you're talking about. What I focus on the most is separating between an incident that triggers a reaction. And you probably know this from the past. I know some of my triggers that I automatically go into defense, or I automatically go into attack, or something else. And understanding the next time that happens, I'm going to just say to myself, stop. Because if I don't stop, it's going to slam right in. There's no time to do a big technique. You've got to notice it the minute it happens. You've got to stop, you've got to breathe, and then you've got to choose, so that you are reacting from choice, not from just an automatic response. Now, in other situations, I'm not sure. Again, it's too generic to answer with any kind of connection, but something that they can do, and it makes it a much more pleasant event. It makes it fun. I now enjoy going to networking because finding about other people is a joy. Selling myself is not so much fun.
Okay. Thank you, Carol. I want to thank you for all those helpful tips there. It's a lot of great information for all of us. So thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.